I thought what I would do is to do something that a little bit different than talk that you hear about space, a little bit different than otherwise. Normally when astronauts go out, we want to talk about what it's like to travel in space, and we want to talk about the liftoff and the spacewalk and all that sort of thing. And what we're going to do today is sort of focus on humans in space and why should we have humans in space, but more importantly, what does it take to have humans in space? Those of you who have been involved in the space program know there's always been a debate since the very beginning that maybe we should send robots in space versus humans in space because of all the issues that I'm going to talk a little bit about. So I want to cover space medicine. You see my talk talks about the space medicine, but it says beyond. The beyond portion is sort of my new passion now that I am quote unquote retired, but still in love with space, about where are we headed? What does the future look like? Those of you who don't want to leave this planet are going to be affected by what happens in space. And I want to share with you the reason why. So that's the two sort of big picture things that we're going to talk about today. So let me start by telling you that my inspiration began when I was 13 years old, 1969, when Neil and Buzz landed on the moon and said those wonderful words, one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind. And it was a tremendous leap for this little boy to look at that black and white television and decide to follow in those guys' footsteps. In the 60s, a few years before that, we had just passed the civil rights movement. So for a little black boy to look at that black and white picture and decide that we want to follow the footsteps was really a leap of faith. But it was one that I was willing to take, and I was so enamored with space and science fiction that I had no choice. Even though I didn't see anybody who looked like me, I didn't see any women that were involved in the space program, it was only white guys, I was going to be the guy to make a difference. And fortunately, there have been a lot of women and men that came before me that actually paved the way for me to eventually have my two successful missions. So it started with that call of us beating the Russians to the moon. And then at home, I got a chance to see that. That's that black and white photo there. And then the first American flag planted on the moon on Apollo 11. So that was wonderful. But I was also inspired by two things. One guy that's a real doctor and one guy that's a fake doctor. And I was probably inspired first by the fake doctor. Those of you who are Star Trek fans like I am know that Leonard McCoy, Bones, as he called it, was the first guy I saw practicing space medicine. So it was really amazing. And if you think about, sometimes science fiction sort of predicts the future. Remember, they walked around with communication devices and with what we essentially call iPads and computers. All of that stuff hadn't been invented yet, but yet I could see that playing out. When I finally decided in high school that I was going to go into medicine and try to get into space, I found this other guy by the name of Joe Kerwin, who was the first American physician to travel in space. And you notice something different about him examining his crew member up there? As a medical doctor, when I see patients, I have them, Mrs. Johnson, come in and have a seat on the table. And then, of course, in space, you don't have to do that. You say, hey, Joe, just float this way. Don't worry about turning around. And it also, I love this because it shows the latest technology, medical technology back then. What is that on his head? Does anybody know? So it's a headlight, but it really wasn't a light. It was a concave mirror that had a hole in the middle of it, so that when you would go and see the doctor, instead of having a pin light or having, the object that we use to look, the otoscope and to look in your ear or eyes, you basically reflect the ambient light into the orifice, and then you can see. So that was the latest and greatest technology back in the day. So with that charge, I did join NASA in 1990, a class of 23 members. We were called the Hairballs. Each class has an opportunity to name its own class. But we were named the Hairballs because we were the 13th class at NASA. And 13 is a lucky number. We didn't want that to be a lucky number. And then also a black cat also is unlucky, and that's how we ended up. And what is the worst thing that a black cat can do is cough up a hairball, and that's what we were, hairball. So here we are showing you to the left the mission that inspired me. To the right is a photo of one of my missions, and in the middle is the patch that John showed the American and Russian flag because we were the first shuttle mission to go to the Russian space station. And you also notice that this flag has a symbol of the Mir station, but also of the shuttle. The mission number was 63, so you'll see 6 and 3 there. But you know the most important thing about this patch is that it has my name on it right there, as you see. So getting into space is kind of fun. Katie and I both flew on the shuttle. Weighs about 5 million pounds. In order to get that 5 million pounds in the air, we have to light 5 engines to produce a thrust of 7.5 million pounds. Gets you into space in less than 8.5 minutes, being pushed back in your seat to 3 to 4 times your weight. And at 8.5 minutes, you go from that noise and extreme to zero gravity just like that. It is an incredible ride. And as one of my colleagues calls it, a violent ride, because it really is. But when you get up there and those engines turn off and you're in microgravity, everything begins to float. Now imagine what would happen if we turned off gravity in this room right now. And that would kind of give you an experience. Think about all the things that are not tied down in this room. It would be kind of exciting. So here's 2 pictures of the crew. On the left side is the picture of us, the typical photo op. And on the right side is the same crew, but in orbit. And you might notice some differences. Look at our faces. Look how our eyes are puffy if you go from the left to the right. If you then look at the young lady that's right below me, that's Eileen Collins, the first female pilot, in this case commander, and later became the first commander of a space shuttle. You can notice her hair is kind of flat there, but look what happens to it when we go into space. She gets an instant afro. We also have 2 women on this mission, and I failed to mention earlier that Vladimir Titov is the Russian because we needed a Russian crew member to go to the Russian space station. And I actually did the first telemedicine conference from space, and we did this in conjunction with the Mayo Clinic. Before I became an astronaut, I was involved in research and developing medical equipment that needed to have the ability to communicate whatever we found in space, physiological data, and send that back down. And that was the first elements of telemedicine. And so that was my job prior to becoming an astronaut, and I wanted to take that to the next level by creating the telemedicine conference. When we go into space, since we grow up in a one-gravity environment, there are a lot of things that happen to you, and I won't go through all of these things, but every physiological system is affected by zero gravity, from cardiovascular to muscle. On the musculoskeletal side, we actually lose about 15 to 20% of our muscle mass. We lose 1% of bone per month in space. So the longer we are up in space, the more bone we lose. And even though we have countermeasures like exercise, that still does not help with the bone loss. It helps with the muscle conditioning, but not the bone loss. Our heart gets smaller when we're up there, mainly because when we're here, we have about an extra 1/5 of our blood volume to support being in a gravitational field. So as I'm standing here, the heart pumps the blood down into the legs and then pumps it back to the heart. You need to prime that pump with extra fluid. In space, it would be like I would ask you to lay down and lay down flat. So there is no need for the size of the muscle, the strength of the muscle, because it's not moving it up and down that gravity field. We are not able to fight off illnesses like we are here on Earth. White blood cell migration decreases, and so you might have heard that we put ourselves in quarantine before we go up in orbit. And that's because we don't want to take anything up with us. And so we want to make sure that no one has a cold. Even a common cold would be spread throughout the crew. There is effects from radiation, there is stress and depression. I'm going to come back to that in just a second. And then a new thing that we found with International Space Station is increased intracranial pressure, which I saw on one of my missions, but we are looking at that now. Now, why is that important? Because as that fluid, I talked about a little bit, that 1/5 of our blood volume is down in our lower extremities, when that moves toward our head, that is sensed as a fluid overload, and we begin to reduce that volume before that happens, that extra fluid gets into our brains, and that causes an increase in intracranial pressure. So what do we do for all those things? Exercise seems to be the main thing. We also have some pharmaceutical types of remedies that we're taking. For example, for bone loss, we're using similar medication like we use for women who have osteoporosis because of the bone loss. So we will exercise 1 to 2 hours a day using the treadmill or using the bicycle ergometer. We actually also have a device called the iRad, and what this is a way in which we can actually simulate weightlifting when we're up there. So 2 to 3 hours of exercise per day. So I mentioned the behavioral aspects that happen. So I'm showing you that not only are we sending Americans up in space, but we're also sending people from different countries. So we have to deal with different cultures. And as we deal and go forward the International Space Station, we're seeing all sorts of folks. So here we have the Japanese, we have American, and we also have a Russian. And so how do you deal with the food? How do you deal with issues of how we interact with each other? All of those things are extremely important. And then lastly is deconditioning. So I told you all those things happen to us when we're in orbit. And if we don't take care of those, we come back deconditioned. So when we land, we typically can't stand up. So I get the question of how many doctors do we have in space? We have currently about 10 doctors that are in space. And as John has already alluded to, we've had just over 300 or so people who have gone into space. And if you include the space flyers, like the people that go up with Blue Origin, it comes out to over 600 or 700 people. So NASA has been involved in the space program for quite some time, and so there's created a lot of spin-off technologies, everything from robotics to telemedicine to pacemakers, microminiaturization of electronics. All of those things are critical not only to helping us in space, but also ending up with spin-off technologies that can be used here on Earth. And when I left NASA about 20 years ago, I formed a company called Vesalius Ventures that is based on that. And these are just some of the companies that have come from telemedicine and the research that we have done in space. These next couple of slides just kind of show you some of the things that have resulted for those of us who may not go into space. So I'll start here on the robotics side. You'll notice that the experiments and things that we've done in robotics has resulted in a lot of things, including robotic surgery. And on the right side, I showed you a view from science fiction where, I don't know if you remember during the Star Trek, when they went into the medical bay, he laid him down on the chair and automatically the vital signs would show up. Well, the device that's right here below is one of those devices that we invented. So if you just lay down in the bed, you would automatically get vital signs. And that is both blood pressure, temperature, pulse, and the like. And the rest of the technology you'll see are things that we've utilized before. Yeah, so using our iPads and iPhones to do telemedicine. And the thing in the middle is called the health box, and this is where you no longer have to go to the doctor's office. You just simply go into a kiosk that might be in your local pharmacy and actually see a nurse practitioner or a doctor via telemedicine. So I'm going to switch gears and talk about what does the future hold. This is a nice view of the International Space Station. You'll see the solar panels and rays. That is probably about the size of a football field, maybe a football field and a half, where we currently have at least 6 to 7 people in orbit. And we've had, I guess, for the last 10 years, a permanent presence in space. And think about this, never in the future of humanity will we not have a presence going forward in space. I love this slide. This is a nice view of the International Space Station. We've got all sorts of ways to get to orbit these days. So it's not just NASA, it's not just governments, it's a whole list of companies that are involved here. There are at least 15 other companies that are involved in some aspect of space here. And all of that's going to change life on this planet as we know it. And I already mentioned that later on in 2026, we'll be going to Artemis. It's already been mentioned about the space economy. So the new space economy, as I look at it, is the next industrial revolution. So everybody's talking about AI. But what we do in low Earth orbit, in geo orbit, is going to really change what we do. There are going to be orbiting platforms. We have launch facilities that are all over the map, and this is just in the United States. There are going to be opportunities in satellite manufacturing and broadband access, in doing emergency type of response, on-orbit manufacturing, medicine, and telemedicine. And this slide is really just showing you the change in blue, the change that has happened over the last few years in the number of launches that have occurred. So in the blue are the government launches, and in the orange are the commercial launches, and you can see that. And we now are delivering more astronauts into space commercially than we are being government. So that's really a tipping point. All this is going to result in a significant economic shift that's going to impact and create this new industrial revolution that's going to impact the workforce, education, and medicine. And with that, I'll just stop. Thank you very much.